The Young and the Restless spoilers. As autumn spread its quiet chill across Genoa City, a strange melancholy hung in the air, a sense that something had been left unresolved, something too fragile to name yet too powerful to ignore. For Kyle, that feeling lived in every corner of his mind. The city's polished skyline looked the same, yet nothing about his world felt familiar anymore. Claire was gone. Not gone in the dramatic sense of death or exile, but gone in that quiet, aching way that left a permanent echo behind. Their breakup had not been explosive, it had simply dissolved, as though love had grown too tired to keep holding on. And in the silence that followed, the person most affected wasn't Kyle or Claire, it was Harrison. The child's world had always been small but safe, revolving around the comforting constellations of routine, affection, and the people he trusted. Claire had once been a star in that sky, his nanny turned confidant, someone who brought both laughter and warmth into a household that had long forgotten the meaning of stability. When she left, she didn't just take her belongings, she took a piece of that safety with her. Harrison asked about her often, his small voice carrying a weight far beyond his years. Why wasn't Claire coming back? Why didn't she say goodbye? Kyle had no answers that wouldn't break them both. So he did what he always did when faced with pain, he buried it beneath responsibility, beneath distraction, beneath the illusion of control. But the closer Halloween came, the harder it became to pretend that the ghosts haunting his home weren't real. He had promised Claire that he would leave Los Angeles and return to Genoa City if she wanted him to. It was an act of surrender, a declaration of love disguised as practicality. Yet when the moment arrived, he couldn't follow through. The investigation into Audra Charles had consumed him. What started as a business dispute had spiraled into something far darker, a network of deception that threatened not only Jabot's stability but the legacy of his family itself. Each new revelation pulled him deeper into the web, and every unanswered question whispered her name. Somewhere in the chaos of contracts and boardroom betrayals, Kyle realized that his work had become a substitute for grief. Claire had asked for space, and he had filled it with noise. But Harrison didn't understand space or emotional distance, he understood presence and absence. To him, Claire's absence felt like punishment for something he couldn't name. Every morning he checked the door, hoping she might walk through it again, smiling, carrying the same calm that used to make the house feel less like an empire and more like a home. When she didn't, he began to retreat inward, quiet, cautious, almost as if he feared that missing her too loudly might make her disappear forever. Kyle watched this transformation with growing guilt. It was one thing to lose the woman he loved. It was another to watch his son lose his sense of safety. The boy's pain mirrored his own, a reflection that made every decision heavier, every day more suffocating. By late October, Genoa City had begun to hum again with speculation. The whispers about Kyle's absence from Los Angeles were growing louder. Some said he was running from heartbreak, others said he was chasing ghosts. Even Jack began to sense the unraveling in his son, the restlessness that came when purpose blurred with regret. The holidays were approaching, and the city's glittering decorations only highlighted how fractured everything had become. Families reunited, lovers reconciled, and yet Kyle stood still, trapped between two worlds that no longer felt like home. He could go back to Los Angeles and pretend to rebuild what was broken, or he could stay in Genoa City and face the shadows he had been avoiding. Either way, he was losing something. The irony was cruel, he had told Claire that he would leave if she asked, but she had never asked. She had vanished instead, choosing silence over confrontation, distance over explanation. That silence was worse than any argument. It wasn't closure, it was a void, an unfinished sentence. Claire had her reasons, though Kyle could only guess at them. Perhaps she needed to rediscover who she was outside of his world. Perhaps she was tired of being caught between love and loyalty, between her past with the Newmans and her future with him. Or perhaps she simply wanted to see if he would come after her without being asked. Either way, she was gone, and her absence had become a character of its own, an invisible presence haunting every room she once filled. Kyle's investigation into Audra should have been a distraction, but instead, it deepened the parallels between his personal and professional chaos. Audra had secrets as layers of manipulation, deals made in whispers, alliances that shifted with the wind. The more Kyle learned, the more he saw reflections of his own choices. Betrayal, ambition, the illusion of control, it was all the same game, just played with different stakes. And through it all, he couldn't stop thinking about Claire. Her moral clarity had once grounded him, made him believe that love could exist without power, that connection could survive without lies. Now, he wasn't sure if such purity existed at all. Halloween arrived like a ghost itself, soft, eerie, inevitable. The city was alive with color and laughter, yet for Kyle and Harrison, the night felt hollow. They carved pumpkins in silence, the flicker of candlelight dancing against the shadows of memory. Harrison asked again when Claire was coming back. Kyle told him soon, though he no longer believed it himself. Later that night, after Harrison had gone to bed, Kyle sat alone on the patio, watching the wind scatter leaves across the marble floor. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of rain. Somewhere in Los Angeles, Claire was probably looking at the same sky, wondering if he still thought of her. The thought hurt more than he wanted to admit. By November's first dawn, Kyle could no longer ignore the pull of Genoa City. The investigation into Audra had reached a breaking point, one that demanded his presence back home. He told himself that returning was a professional necessity, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Genoa City was where it had all begun, his family, his mistakes, his love story with Claire. It was where he had learned that power could build empires but never fill the empty spaces left by the people you lose. And so, as the city stirred awake beneath a golden sunrise, Kyle made his decision. He would bring Harrison home for the holidays. Whether Claire was waiting or not, they needed to face the ghosts together. When Kyle and Harrison finally arrived in Genoa City, the energy shifted. Even before the car stopped at the Abbott estate, Kyle could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the echoes of generations, the unspoken expectations. Jack greeted them with warmth, but his eyes carried questions he didn't ask. Everyone did. They all wanted to know if Claire would follow, if this was the first step toward reconciliation or just another chapter in a long story of heartbreak. But Claire remained silent. She had received Kyle's messages, seen the calls, read the brief notes that carried both apology and longing, yet she hadn't responded. Her silence wasn't coldness, it was hesitation, a need to see if there was still something worth saving. Claire's world had changed, too. Since the breakup, she had been rediscovering herself, what it meant to exist beyond other people's expectations. Her connection to the Newmans had always been complicated, and the shadow of that legacy often clashed with her hopes for a simpler life. Kyle had offered love, but he came with chaos, corporate wars, family rivalries, and an unending need to fix what was broken. She wanted peace, and peace didn't exist in Kyle's world. Yet, as winter approached and the city prepared for celebration, she couldn't deny the ache that surfaced every time she saw a photo of Harrison or heard a mention of his name. The child had carved his way into her heart, and that bond was something she couldn't easily sever. Rumors began to swirl that Kyle might invite Claire to join him and Harrison in Los Angeles for the holidays. The idea seemed impossible, yet strangely inevitable. Despite everything, Kyle still believed that love could be repaired, that distance could be bridged, that time could heal. Genoa City thrived on second chances, and he wasn't ready to believe that theirs was over. He told himself that the holidays were for forgiveness, that maybe seeing Harrison again would remind Claire of the life they had almost built together, the laughter, the warmth, the quiet moments that still lingered like perfume on the air. But Claire wasn't so easily swayed by nostalgia. She wanted proof that he had changed, that he wasn't just trying to rebuild the past but create something new. As snow began to fall on Genoa City, the world seemed to slow. Lights flickered across storefronts, and carolers sang songs of love and redemption. It was the kind of season that made even the most hardened hearts soften. Kyle stood by the window one evening, Harrison asleep beside him, and watched the snowflakes drift past the glass. In their fragile descent, he saw everything he had lost and everything he still hoped for. Love, like snow, could melt or blanket the world in silence. It depended on how long you held on before letting go. In another part of the city, Claire looked out at the same snowfall, her breath clouding the window. She thought of Harrison, of his laugh, of the way his small hand fit perfectly into hers. She thought of Kyle, flawed, stubborn, endlessly loyal, and wondered if the universe was giving her another chance to decide. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened but about believing that something good could still come after the wreckage. The season would decide. Genoa City would watch. And as winter tightened its grip, one question lingered like a heartbeat in the dark. When love has been broken but not buried, can it still be reborn beneath the snow? The autumn wind carried more than the scent of pumpkins and fallen leaves. It carried tension, quiet, persistent, and impossible to ignore. At the Abbott estate, the decorations for Halloween had already been hung by the house staff, but the joy that usually filled the season was missing. Harrison sat by the window, his face pressed against the glass, eyes fixed on the long driveway where nothing moved. He didn't want to celebrate this year. The costumes, the candies, the laughter, all of it felt meaningless without the people he wanted most. He had told everyone who would listen that he didn't want to spend Halloween with his grandparents. He wanted his father. And he wanted Claire. But neither of them were there. And that was the problem no one seemed able to fix. Kyle had promised his son that they would celebrate together, yet life in Genoa City had become a tangle of unfinished business and dangerous distractions. His work at Jabot had turned into a battlefield, not a career. Victor Newman was circling again, quietly but methodically, setting his sights on the company that had always stood as a rival to Newman Enterprises. Victor's interest was never simple. He didn't just want control, he wanted dominance, the kind that left opponents humiliated and indebted. Kyle knew that any misstep now could cost his family everything. But how could he think about corporate strategy when his son's voice still echoed in his mind, small and trembling, asking if Claire would come home for Halloween? That question alone had more power than all the business empires in the world. There was also Sienna Bacall. She had arrived in his orbit with the kind of quiet confidence that always spelled danger. Her connection to both Los Angeles and Genoa City was murky, and the whispers about her involvement in recent scandals made her both fascinating and risky. Kyle had intended to meet her for business, an exchange of information about Audra Charles, who had become the center of his obsession, but nothing about Sienna ever stayed purely professional. Every conversation with her felt like walking a tightrope between revelation and ruin. Still, she had answers he needed, and Kyle couldn't afford to walk away. Not now. Not with Victor hunting Jabot and Audra's name tied to every strange development that crossed his desk. Yet the cost of that pursuit was always the same: time, distance, and guilt. And Harrison was running out of patience. The child had always been sensitive to absence. He noticed every late night, every broken promise, every empty seat at breakfast. This time, his disappointment hardened into something more stubborn. He refused to put on his costume, refused to go to Jack and Diane's party, refused to even step outside when the other children came to visit. He said he would wait for his father, and he meant it. Phyllis tried to distract him with candy, Diane tried to convince him with kindness, but nothing worked. Harrison had inherited the Abbott determination, and that meant once he decided something, there was no undoing it. He wanted his father home, and he wanted Claire there too. The child's longing became a mirror for Kyle's own unrest, a reminder that love, in all its forms, was a series of impossible expectations. In Los Angeles, Claire was living in a carefully constructed calm. After walking away from Kyle, she had tried to rebuild her life with discipline, keeping her focus on work and staying clear of the drama that had once consumed her. But distance didn't erase connection, it only sharpened it. Harrison's name came up more often than she expected, in texts from mutual friends, in the occasional photograph that found its way to her phone. She missed him terribly, yet she had convinced herself that stepping away was for the best. Children didn't need unstable attachments, and Kyle's world was anything but stable. What she didn't know was that her absence had become a wound for the boy she loved like family. Every day without her was another question unanswered, another reminder that goodbyes rarely make sense to a child. Kyle couldn't take it anymore. He booked the flight, telling himself it would only be a short trip, a weekend at most. He would go home, spend Halloween with Harrison, and then return to Los Angeles to handle his business with Sienna and Audra before Victor's plans advanced any further. It was supposed to be simple, but nothing about Genoa City ever was. When he arrived, Harrison's reaction was immediate, a mixture of joy and defiance. The boy threw himself into his father's arms, only to ask immediately if Claire was coming. The question pierced deeper than Kyle wanted to admit. He promised that he would try, though he knew that was a fragile promise to make. The following morning, Kyle sat in his father's office, surrounded by ledgers and reports that spoke of Victor's encroaching influence. Every acquisition, every subtle manipulation of supply chains, it all pointed toward the same endgame. Victor Newman was preparing to strike. Kyle's instincts screamed at him to stay, to defend Jabot, to protect the Abbott legacy. But every time he glanced at his phone, he saw the message Harrison had sent him, a simple photo of a pumpkin carved with shaky hands, and underneath it, the words "Claire would like this." Logic and emotion waged their endless war inside him. He couldn't be in two places at once, and whichever choice he made, he would fail someone. Meanwhile, Sienna waited in Los Angeles, her patience thinning. She had information Kyle needed. Proof that Audra's reach extended into Newman territory, and perhaps even beyond. But Sienna wasn't the kind of woman who tolerated delays. Every minute Kyle spent in Genoa City was a minute she spent deciding whether he was worth the trouble. She had her own secrets, her own past she didn't want dragged into the light. And if he wasn't careful, she could turn from ally to threat faster than he imagined. The longer Kyle stayed away, the more dangerous her silence became. When he finally decided to take Harrison with him, it felt like a compromise. The boy needed his father, and maybe seeing Claire again would give them both the closure, or miracle, they needed. Harrison was thrilled at first, convinced that this trip meant they would be a family again. He asked endless questions about what Los Angeles looked like in autumn, if Claire had decorated her home for Halloween, if she still remembered his favorite candy. Kyle tried to answer without breaking. The truth was that he didn't know if Claire wanted to see them. He only hoped that love could still find its way through disappointment. But Los Angeles was no longer safe. The shadow that had hovered over Noah Newman's accident still loomed large. Rumors spread that whoever had orchestrated the crash wasn't finished, and the name Matt Clark, or Mitch Bacall, floated through conversations like a curse. If there was even a chance that Claire was related to that storm, then bringing Harrison into the city might expose him to danger. Phyllis had warned Kyle about it, but he had brushed it aside. Now, as the plane descended over the glittering skyline, doubt began to creep in. The city below looked beautiful, but beauty in Los Angeles was often a mask for destruction. When Claire received word that Kyle and Harrison were coming, her first reaction was panic. She wanted to see them, of course she did, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Her life had only just begun to stabilize, and reopening that wound felt dangerous. Yet, when she imagined Harrison's face, hopeful and unguarded, her heart twisted. She had loved him like her own, and the thought of disappointing him again made her chest ache. Still, there were things she couldn't explain to a child, adult complexities, emotional fractures, the need to protect him from the chaos that always followed her. So she made the hardest choice she could, she decided not to go. She sent a message, gentle and apologetic, explaining that she couldn't change her plans, that she hoped he would understand. But children rarely understand self-preservation when their hearts are involved. Harrison's heartbreak was immediate and devastating. The excitement that had carried him across states evaporated in seconds. He couldn't grasp why Claire wouldn't come, why love had to feel so complicated. Kyle tried to console him, but the boy's tears were more than sadness. they were betrayal in its purest, most innocent form. Kyle realized then that his attempt to fix one broken thing had shattered another. He had underestimated the depth of a child's love and the cost of reopening wounds without preparing for their consequences. As the city lights flickered outside the hotel window that night, Kyle understood the truth he had been avoiding. Some distances can't be closed by flights or apologies. Some absences echo louder when you chase them. Claire's refusal wasn't cruelty, it was protection. And maybe, deep down, she was right. Los Angeles had become dangerous, its beauty laced with threat. Whoever had tried to silence Noah's truth was still out there, and Claire's connection to that tangled web made her a target. By bringing Harrison here, Kyle had unknowingly placed his son in the middle of something far larger than heartbreak. He stood by the window long after Harrison had fallen asleep, the city glowing beneath him like a sea of quiet danger. Somewhere out there, Victor Newman was still hunting Jabot, Sienna was waiting with secrets she might no longer share, and Claire was fighting her own battle between fear and longing. Kyle's world had never felt smaller or more fragile. He had come seeking connection, but what he found was consequence.